Kristen, welcome to the Running Effect podcast. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great, Dominic. Thanks for having me.
I think many people know you with your work with Whoop and as the global head of human performance. But I think going back even further than that, there's an element of your story that I personally didn't know until I dived into the research was that you were actually an incredible athlete yourself, to
Mm.
the point of even being, I think, an inductee in the 2021 Hall of Fame for Iowa. Take me through those years as a field hockey player.
Yeah, so I played field hockey and basketball at the University of Iowa and have always been just really passionate about just sports in general and being on teams. And was really lucky to be able to play for an extraordinary team at the University of Iowa. My primary sport was field hockey, and I was always, I guess, since a young age, I just dreamt of playing in the Olympics, and Iowa was really, really good at the time. My coach was a three-time Olympian herself, and had an incredible staff, and just felt like that was the place I could go to realize my dreams of playing on the national team and representing my country. And yeah, so an amazing experience. And then I walked onto the basketball team my senior year. I was going to play both field hockey and basketball in college, but as you know, Division One athletics, it's tough to play two sports. It's tough to play one sport, let alone two sports. So um, yeah, but I was able to realize my dream of playing college basketball my senior year, and we won the Big Ten championship. It was pretty awesome. So yeah, I had a phenomenal experience as a collegiate athlete, and yeah, it was awesome.
Looking back on those years, almost 30 years later,
Hmm.
what are some of the biggest lessons you learned from those years of playing competitive NCAA Division One sports that you feel like have propelled you in your current role?
Yeah, I think I think, and this is really hard, but understanding that your self worth isn't wrapped up entirely on how many goals you score, how many baskets you shoot, how much playing time you get. I think that when you're a competitive athlete, your identity, your self worth, your self esteem is just so wrapped up in outcomes. And I think it takes a lot of awareness to make sure that you can stay grounded outside of those results. And I think the path to that for each individual is very different. But I think, for me, that was always, a bit of a struggle. Like, it was really hard for me to separate. And I wish I had a little bit more wisdom at the time to not be quite so hard on myself, and recognize that I am still a good person when I don't score the winning goal, or, uh, if I don't play that well. Like, I'm still a good human being. And unfortunately, like, I didn't always feel like I was a good person, after, having results that I didn't feel proud of. And I think in some ways, that is motivating, can motivate, I think, performance in some ways, but it's not a healthy place, to have motivation, come from a place like that. So I think that would be the big thing that I wish I had come to understand a bit sooner.
In 1996, you were the United States Olympic team alternate. Take me
Mm.
through that experience of coming so close to something I feel like every boy and girl dreams of, coming so close, but not quite making it. And what's your
Yeah,
perspective
yeah.
on that many years later?
I think it kind of goes back to my other point. Like, I was the youngest, if not one of the youngest players on that team, and it was a squad of 24. And um, to go to the Olympics, you pick 16 athletes. And I took a year off of college to train in Atlanta with the team. And at first I was just really grateful to be on the team, and then I was like, shit, I can make this team. I was just happy to be on the squad, and then realized that I had an actual real shot at it. And I think that's the hardest realization, when you're like, you actually think you can make it, and you're so close to making it, and to just be one spot shy of making it. I feel like it's almost like I'd rather would not even had a chance, though, because it was just at the time really, really painful. What was cool, though, is you get to pretty much do everything you get to still be a part of the whole experience. So so I think that that's great, but it is a hard position because just in the back of your mind, you're like, in order to get to play, someone has to get injured and or be sick, or and obviously you don't wish that, but at the same time, like you're so desperate to get out there and play and be able to say that you competed. But and just feel what that feels like on that stage. But yeah, I mean, I think for me it was really motivating to keep going. We had our next big event was the World Cup, and so just being so close, was definitely super motivating, and I knew, and it really catalyzed my my effort and my desire to kind of uh, be able to compete on that stage. So it really did focus my effort, for those next couple of years leading into the World Cup. um, and yeah, and I was really grateful to be able to play in the World Cup and start at the World Cup in Utrecht in '98.
On a little different track and subject, I have to ask you, we're recording this on March 8th, should be out probably sometime next week or in the coming
Mm.
2 weeks. So we'll be in the thick of March Madness soon. I have to ask you, as a Hawkeye through and through, what's it
Oh,
like to see the dominance of Caitlin Clark at the
oh
moment?
my gosh. I mean, it's just I could not be prouder. It just Yeah, I really think that University of Iowa, and this is one of the reasons why I went there, like they just, I think, are really unique at creating conditions specifically for female athletes, for women athletes to really thrive and maximize potential. And it's not to say that Caitlin Clark wouldn't have been her most amazing self somewhere else, but I do think there's something really unique about the Iowa community and how they rally around women's sports. I mean, we broke in field hockey. There is no field hockey even in Iowa, right? But we would break NC2A records. Like the community would come out. We were good, super athletic, fast-paced game. At the college level, it's nothing like, you know, high school or middle school field hockey, which I think people have in their brains. But just go to YouTube, put in USA field hockey, and you'll see how dynamic and amazing the sport is at that level. But we would have literally just rabid fans, and we would sell out. And if you watch Iowa basketball, I mean, you see, like, there is not a seat in the house that is open, right? Like, it is just the stadium is jam packed, and I love how University of Iowa supports all of its athletes, but I love how they rally around our women's sports, and just create this beautiful energy in the community around 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 female sports. So it's really a special place. And I love that Caitlin has elevated women's basketball generally, but women's sports in general. Like I mean, just the whole thing. Like her impact is just, it's hard to quantify in this moment. But yeah, I mean, she has just created a movement, which is so cool.
We kind of went into your successful collegiate career, your passion for field hockey, how you got into basketball. You then went on to coach at Princeton, if I'm not mistaken, and you were
Hmm.
also just absolutely dominant there. I think you won 12 Ivy League titles in the 13 seasons as a coach, which
Yeah,
is remarkable in any sport. And then, of
yeah.
course, all that you're doing at Whoop, which we'll get into in a minute, obviously incredibly successful and excellent. So I'm curious, can you pinpoint a moment, like, when did you first feel the call to be excellent at things in your life? Because if you look
Mm,
at it from a timeline perspective, you've been excellent at every stage. So when do you feel like
mm.
you first felt that calling to, I want something more out of my life and I want to be excellent?
Yeah, you know, I think, unfortunately, a lot of like my early, I think, motivation behind wanting to be, well, I was always really fascinated with, I gravitated toward, people who could perform at a really high level. I remember watching the Olympics, and there was a woman, her name is Tenley Albright, and she was being interviewed, and she was uh, a skater, and she wasn't competing in a recent Olympic, but she was reflecting back on her Olympic experience. And she was, and at the moment, she was the first. What they were celebrating was actually she was the first a female orthopedic surgeon. And I remember just being absolutely captivated by this woman that she had, she was a surgeon, right? Which no small feat in becoming a medical doctor in general, but just in the field of surgery, especially orthopedic surgery, and being the first female, I was just enamored by that. And then she had this, Olympic history as a figure skater, and so I was just like looking at this woman. I'm like, God, like you can really have both, and I think and actually I named my daughter Tenley after Tenley Albright. So, but I think that was like a moment that really, um, I think it just put very clearly, put a framework in front of me, or just an aspiration in front of me that is like, wow, uh, women can be both great at athletics, and they could be, great academically, and they can do both and have careers in both, and thrive in both. And so I think that was like a really catalyzing moment for me. But I would say like teams like had a really in a lot of ways a really tough upbringing. My household was really unstable, very chaotic. And teams I think just provided like what I felt was this like safe haven. Like I just could escape into a team. And I think, going early, staying late, was more of a product of just not wanting to be in my home. And I just had this great excuse to just spend extra time, and then started getting a lot of validation. You spend a lot of time spent playing, a sport, you get really good. And had a lot of validation from that. And yeah, and so I think I just realized that I loved being really good at stuff. Like I loved, the unhealthy side of it potentially was just there's a lot of praise and attention that comes from that. But I love that feeling of being expert. Um, and I was super focused on like Larry Bird and Michael Jordan and eventually Tiger Woods. These people who could execute under pressure consistently. And that's honestly like what got me into the academic side of my pursuits, in terms of trying to really understand, how do we consistently perform? How do you win an Ivy League championship, not just once, but year after year after year after year, 12 times in 13 years? Like how does one do that, right? And I think, my whole life has been really trying to um I think kind of codify this idea that we can consistently perform to our potential if we understand both the physiological and psychological factors that move around our motivation, our energy production, our attentional capacity. If we can pinpoint that, and we can build a framework and structure around it, we don't have to guess about our performance levels, right? We can choose our level of performance. So that has kind of been my thesis this my whole life, and really trying to figure out, okay, well, what are those factors, both physiological and psychological, that underpin consistent levels of performance? So I suppose at a young age, I was always kind of chasing consistency, and with these Mia Hamm and these role models in mind that were just able to repeat performance. I became really obsessed about that for myself as an athlete, and then that bled into what I chose to study and pursue, and that certainly was a huge feature of my coaching experience, is building that framework.
You mentioned many of the female athletes that had a sincere impact. I mean, if you're naming your
Mm,
daughter after one of them, truly an impact,
yeah,
an
yeah.
impact on you, and kind of got you started in your career path and in your path of excellence. What's the reflection process like now, even on this podcast, as you're speaking to young females listening, knowing
Mm.
that you are having the same impact that other individuals had on you for the next generation?
Mm. Well, it's gratifying, of course, and humbling. And I think for young men and young women, I think one of the most important things that you can do is really try to, and this is so hard, I think, in today's age. Just there's so much coming at, I think, us in the form of media and content and whatnot. And I think you gotta pick what you bring into your life really carefully, because that's kind of what you end up becoming in some ways. And I think, like, for me, when I was young, I didn't have access to a lot of stuff, but I had access to, these very kind of, I think my brain was really focused on like the Larry Bird and the Mia Hamm and the, and as a result, like that's kind of that's what I wanted to become, and those are the people, the things that I kind of surrounded myself with, and I think we just have to remember that, who we hang out with, and you know oh, how we think, our thought patterns, and where we apply our attention, like we become that, right? Whether we like it or not. So we have to pick those things very, very carefully. And a lot of it is just kind of deciding, all right, who do I actually want to be in this world? Like who do I aspire to be? And just and as you're when you're younger, like that's going to evolve and change, and it should, but you need to be asking yourself that, because I think the key to happiness, and the key to growth, and to impact, or whatever it is that you value, is aligning your behaviors with who you say you want to be in the world. And if there is an alignment, it's just super hard to be joyful and energetic, right? And you're kind of constantly in this limbo. So, I think for me, what I learned from my role models is that this behavior, value, identity alignment is absolutely critical, but we have to take time to reflect on what it is that we care about, what do we believe in, and then auditing, do my behaviors actually align with what I say I care about, what I believe in? Ultimately, who is this person I want to be in the world? And if someone were to shadow me for a day, would they be able to guess who I want to be? Like, that's the other amazing litmus test. If your little sister or brother were following you around, like, could they tell someone else who you are? And that's, I think, the bigger project, and kind of what I've been able to take from my mentors, along the way, and what I hope to kind of, pass down to folks like you.
Yeah. No, it's so good. Something I quote all too frequently is you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And then I shared
Oh,
that with
yeah.
someone and they actually enlightened me that there was a new
That's
study that came out that
it's
said
the
that
lowest denominator of
yeah,
that 5.
exactly.
Yeah,
Which is
I've seen
scary.
that. It's super
But
scary, but that's the thing, like, you adapt to that lowest functioning person, kinda you that's what can be scary, and so you gotta pick people you surround yourself with really wisely, and I would also say the content that you surround yourself with. Also, like, that has a massive influence on how you think, and things that you choose, and, I mean, I will say that I think, being able to direct your thoughts and your attention in an intentional way is the superpower of the 21st century. We are not good at it, right? Like, just the way modernity is set up now, it makes it almost impossible, right? I mean, the phone, as amazing as it is, I mean, if you just I mean, I try to, like, think about, how many times do I pick it up during a day, and open it up? I mean, it's frightening. And so I think getting a relationship in check across all the how we direct our thoughts and intention is kind of a really important exercise, for I think, for all human beings.
getting into your bread and butter here, I think a
Mm.
good question to start us off that I'm very curious about. What is something you currently know that you wish you knew back as a collegiate athlete?
There's no question that I wish I understood the significance of my relationship to light, and how that affects mood, um, energy levels, uh, just my alertness, my ability to sleep and recover. It all starts with light behavior, and I didn't find this out until about, I don't know, probably 8 or 9 years ago.
I think a question I'm most curious to hear you dive into, I've heard you talk about it before, but for the sake of our own podcast, how does blue light affect our sleep? And also, on the contrary, how does light when we wake up and getting natural
Sure.
light affect the rest of our day? It really sets the stage for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Light, natural light, artificial light, impacts when we feel alert and when we feel sleepy. So, what we need to understand about blue light is that after the sun goes down, we haven't actually adapted to blue light. Our body isn't expecting to see any form of blue light after the sun goes down. It's kind of wild to think, right? When we consider how much light we consume, after the sun goes down. And what happens when we're viewing light, lots of direct artificial light after the sun goes down, is it interferes with the release of melatonin. And melatonin is a hormone that helps us feel sleepy. Melatonin also does lots of other things as well. It reduces, you want to have lots of circulating melatonin after the sun goes down. 80% of your melatonin is going to get released kind of prior to bed, and then about other 20% is kind of being released throughout the day. It has a neuroprotective effect. Again, it helps reduce cancer. It's linked to insulin sensitivity. So when we don't release melatonin, we become more insulin resistant, which is bad. That leads to metabolic dysfunction. And I know this is probably your population isn't super concerned with that yet, but these little moments obviously add up, and all of a sudden you find yourself pre-diabetic 10 years later because of all these micro decisions. But so we want to make sure we protect melatonin production. So we need to ensure that we're dimming lights after the sun goes down. And this is, I mean, I say that and it's like everyone's like, ha ha ha. Like, how is that? I mean, it's like, how is that even possible, right? The way life is set up. And it just even on college campuses and high school, like you're doing homework, like there's so many things that are happening after the sun goes down that you feel like you have no control over or that you're required to do. But it comes at a significant cost to our mental, physical, and emotional well-being. Right. So ideally, we're dimming lights after the sun goes down to block that blue light or using filters on our devices to minimize that blue light so we can release melatonin. Melatonin is what is going to help you fall asleep. And when we bypass that natural pressure for sleep, and we get all of a sudden we get like alert, that's because your body shifts into sympathetic mode, right? Which is the branch of your nervous system that is activated, right? That's going to tell your heart rate to increase. You're going to release all sorts of hormones that are going to make you feel alert and energized when you should be sleeping. So giving into that pressure for sleep is really important, and facilitating that in a natural way is really important. And just to kind of stay on that train, this will just illustrate the importance of no light, definitely after 11 p.m. So when we're viewing light between the hours of 11 p.m. and 4 a.m., it has a pro-depressive effect next day. And this is a paper published called the Timing of Light Exposure Effects on Mood and Brain Circuits. And it was published in 2017, I think. And this was just the primary finding is that basically your motivation and reward, kind of the dopamine system is directly impacted when we're viewing light between the hours of 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. So, you know, and I think probably a lot of adolescents are viewing light. A lot of individuals, a lot of people are viewing lights. Certainly, shift workers are between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. But just you have to understand it comes at a significant cost as it relates to performance, health, and longevity.
This is such a basic question, but when I was in high school, it was something I struggled with all the time. I think I read Matthew Walker's Why We Sleep like
Mm,
freshman or sophomore year of high school, and that
yeah,
really fundamentally changed how I slept and how I structured my days. And to
amazing.
have the information, it's like the saying, when you know it, you can never go back. And so
Yeah,
when I
yeah,
had the
you can't
information and
unsee
I would, yeah,
it.
exactly. I'd be around my peers, and there was just such a sense of how much I sleep doesn't matter, when I sleep doesn't matter,
Yeah,
and I'd love to kind of have you break down that misconception specifically
yeah,
for a younger audience of how you
yeah.
sleep will affect the trajectory of your life.
It
Literally.
does. It actually does, in so many ways, and yeah, that I would absolutely recommend. That book is so beautiful. Matthew Walker is just such a, he's been so important for this field of sleep science and sleep education, and yeah, just totally indebted to him as a lot of people are for just illuminating, no pun intended, the importance of light and getting it at the right times and the right doses and just this importance of sleep. But yeah, I mean, I think this whole notion that I'll sleep when I'm dead, and actually, when you think about just from at a fundamental level, um, the order of importance in terms of human health, like you can go quite a long time without eating and without drinking. I think I think you can go almost a month, right? The human body is incredibly resilient, but you go with 1 week without sleep and you die. So, in terms of order of operation, like sleep is really, really important, right? And there's a reason why we spend a third of our life sleeping is because it's important. So, you know, I, I would go so far to say that if you want to fundamentally upgrade your life in every single category, the place to start is getting your sleep right. Now, you can't fix your sleep if something is not right with your sleep. You can't fix your sleep without addressing circadian rhythms, right? So, the number one circadian behavior, which I outlined, is light, your light behavior. And we talked about light leading into bed. We'll talk about light in other times during the day. As it relates to sleep, but you got to fix your circadian rhythms, and then that will help you fix your sleep. But if you want to run faster, if you want to be smarter, there's a direct relationship between sleep wake timing specifically and GPA. This is a study that was done at Harvard with Harvard students, and there's a direct relationship between sleep wake consistency, sleep wake regularity, how regular your onset and offset of sleep are, and GPA. So you'll get smarter. As I said, you'll get faster. You'll have better levels of resilience. We found this in a study with 1,000 paratroopers who are not too much older, from Army Alaska, not too much older than you. So really, these are lots of young guys. So exit bat velocity, exit ball velocity, baseball, swim times. Like it's just sleep is going to impact every marker of performance you care about. It will impact your next day executive function, your mental control. So it's absolutely investing in sleep, and I think at this point it's just sheer ignorance. If someone says like I don't need sleep, like that is just absolute ignorance. You 100% do need sleep, and if you're not getting it, you are losing a competitive advantage. And had the opportunity to work with just some of the very best in the business, the Michael Phelps and the LeBron James and the Rory McIlroy, and those guys are elite, right? So they might be able to still be, you know um because they're so talented, right? They can get away potentially with shorter sleep and still win. But that's not what the conversation here. It is about being able to fully leverage your own individual potential, right? So if you're getting short sleep and inconsistent sleep, you are not going to be able to leverage your individual potential to its fullest degree. You might still win, right? Because you're that much better, but you're not able to fully leverage your potential. So when some of these guys that I just listed all of a sudden start sleeping and optimizing their sleep, optimizing these circadian behaviors, they go from being already really good to even a new level of human functioning, again, relative to their own potential. So I think we just need to understand that you will set a ceiling on your potential with your sleep.
I think for many athletes, if you tell them
Mm,
to do one more rep in the weight room or run an extra mile or shoot 50 more free
mhm.
throws, they'll have no problem doing it. To them, it's like, I'm already gritty. I can be more
Yeah,
gritty. I can get it done. If you tell an
yeah.
athlete to sleep another hour or two every night consistently, very few will actually have the discipline to do that. Why do you think
Mm,
that is? Because most athletes have that mindset of, I want to be a winner. I want to do what it's
mm,
going to take to be my best, but very
mm.
few actually do what's most natural.
They can't perceive how that loss of sleep impacts their performance. That's what's so tough, right? And that's why it's such a hard sell is that you can't perceive your own cognitive, physical, and emotional declines. They just happen. So, folks on short sleep just end up adapting to a lower level of functioning. And then when they start getting sleep, they realize, "Oh my gosh, like I'm so much better." I mean, I see this with my son. He plays ice hockey, and the ice hockey season is grueling. We live in Massachusetts. It's really high level. He plays club as well for South Shore Kings, so a club team, and then plays high school hockey. So he's got this really intense like high school hockey season, and it lasts from November to March. It just ended. And it's a grind. Like he goes to bed way later than he wants to. He gets his, he measures his sleep. He gets shorter sleep than he wants to. His heart rate variability is kind of just, always lagging. His recovery is always lagging. And now that ice hockey's done, we've realigned his circadian rhythms, like he's getting the sleep that he needs. he is like a new human being. He's like, "Mom, I just feel so much stronger, so much faster, so much more alert." Like, he just, like, can't even believe that he was, like, operating at this, like, lower level, still competing and doing fine, he didn't get injured or anything, but it is like a constant effort to just stay, just to kinda keep himself in neutral. So I think when you start sleeping and aligning your circadian rhythms, you actually see what is possible in terms of alertness and focus and speed and strength and power, and it just fundamentally changes your bar, and then you never want to go back once you feel that, and I think that's when, like the guys like LeBron, and who all of a sudden start sleeping and are like, oh my god, there's a whole nother level I can access. And then once you do that, it's like you set up your environment and infrastructure in a way that so you don't go back. And I think that's the opportunity. There's just an enormous it is the greatest natural performance answer, sleep. Like, there's no question about it. And so if you're not leveraging it, you're just missing out on a huge opportunity.
How do you, I don't quite have the best word for it, but I'll say, how do you work, for lack of a better word, work on your sleep for an athlete like your son when there are many months
Yeah.
out of the year that he has no other option,
Control.
or, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, control, or an athlete in the NBA or NFL where they
Mhm.
have prime time late night games. They're not even leaving the
Yeah.
stadium till 1 a.m. in the morning, or
Yeah, yeah.
even someone like the person who edits this podcast plays baseball at a very high level and wakes up
Mm.
5 a.m. every day to lift with his team. It's like that's just
Yeah.
super unideal. So how do you work on
Yeah.
sleep in those unideal conditions?
That is suboptimal. I did get the Yankees to switch to later, lift times, based on our research, though. Um, they should switch those times because that is ridiculous. Like, because teenagers and kind of, early 20s or whatever, you're gonna basically so after puberty, there's like this shift in a teenager's sleep where you used to fall asleep at like 9, now like your pressure for sleep's going to come around 10:30, and or even just 11. So there's that, right? And then you've got to wake up for school at 7. Now you're like 8 hours sleep, which is short. Basically that age range needs about 9 hours in bed to meet their sleep need, right? So for him, and for these examples you just said, you're getting short sleep. So okay, you've got short sleep, and just again, this age group, you all need about 9 hours of sleep, 8.5, 9 hours in bed, right? Assuming that you're a pretty efficient sleeper, that's how much sleep you're going to need. When that gets cut short to like 8 or 7.5, you are going to see an absolute decline in certain measures of performance. So the best way to offset that is to take a nap that's not going to interfere with your biological sleep. So you want that sleep to basically end by 1:30 or 2. So my son, again, not ideal. He's getting home from school at 2:30. He immediately goes up to his room, eye mask, and he sleeps for like 90 minutes. So that's a way that's he did that throughout the entire hockey season just to kind of offset, just the short sleep and just stay ahead of the curve. And then he'd wake up, he'd be pretty alert and ready to go. And that got him through the season. So that is definitely the protocol that I recommend with MLB and NBA, NHL, like all of these athletes who are, having to deal with travel demands and short sleep. The nap is the way to do it, because you don't want to create lots of variability between. You want to try to keep your wake up the same as much as possible, and even when that means like slightly shorter sleep, it's better to wake up when you naturally want to wake up, as opposed to sleeping in until 11 a.m. or noon. And in fact, there was a really interesting study with college students. It looked at basically social jet lag and other aspects of sleep, and basically lots of social jet lag, which is basically a lot the variability between your daytime and weekend sleep, right? Which is a feature of most teenagers, right? They wake up too early, they got short sleep, and then on the weekend they oversleep. Well, that's called social jet lag, and that's basically linked to non-suicidal self-injury. They and this was a study that they did with about 800 85 college students, and basically saw that for every hour of variability between weekday and weekend sleep. So every hour of variability between weekday and weekend sleep, they saw a 17% increase in non
Wow,
suicidal self harm.
that's crazy.
17% for every hour. So this gets to my kind of other really important feature of getting good sleep is trying to stabilize when you go to bed and when you wake up. It's so important. And in order to achieve that sleep consistency, you need to see light within 20 minutes of waking. The worst thing you can do is stay in your bed, scroll on your phone for an hour before you get up. Like, once you get that surge of cortisol that, like, gets wake wants to wake you up, get yourself out of bed and get into the natural light. That will start kind of your pressure that will basically kind of kickstart your circadian rhythms, get you going, tell your body, your cells, your tissues, and organs that's time to be awake. And then that will help you actually fall asleep, at a decent time that following night. So, yeah, those are some
I
of the
remember
things.
reading
Yeah.
this in Matthew's work, but he mentioned, and I don't have the numbers off the top of my
Mm.
head. I'm not very good at retaining information like you are, as you've illustrated in this conversation. But he mentioned the study essentially of how when schools start, it affects. They see changes in
Oh, yeah.
what's retained, and you know what I'm talking about. Can you speak to that
100%.
when schools start and how it affects learning and retaining
Yeah.
information?
Yeah, and it kinda goes back to the reason why, I think it's some schools in maybe Oregon and, like, Minnesota maybe, like, it's not we switched to 8 o'clock start, in my town, which still probably isn't late enough if we think about what kids need and when they feel naturally sleepy. It's that kind of 11 p.m., 10:30, 11 p.m. time. um it's still not quite enough sleep, for most kids, but there's really good research that they were able to show that um for every hour of for this extra additional hour, SAT scores, just mean GPA, all of the markers, kind of performance metrics that schools care about, got better with this extra hour of sleep for the student. So there's that's just another data point, that we can look at that helps us understand that there's this direct relationship between health and well-being and performance, and sleep.
Going back to something you were mentioning a minute ago, which is the average kid who scrolls on their phone first thing they wake up, and unfortunately, right before they go to sleep as well. Could you
Yeah.
just speak some wisdom into kids listening of why you shouldn't do that? Like,
Yeah.
I can't comprehend on many levels why that's the first thing you would want to do and fill your brain with when you wake up. But from a scientific standpoint, are there any sort of studies that you can knock into some people's heads of why that shouldn't be the first thing you do when you wake up?
Well, I think if we go back to the superpower of the 20th century, controlling, directing your thoughts and attention. Like, your phone, you are a pawn in someone else's game when you are on your phone. And one of the most important core psychological needs is control. When you are a pawn in someone else's game, you don't feel control of your life. And you are adopting a point of view about your life that is not your own, it is someone else's. And so when people, there's plenty of research that shows direct relationships. I think it's harder for girls than, or seems to have more of a negative effect for girls than it does for boys. But both boys and girls are not getting, mentally, psychologically more robust and healthier the more they look at their phone. In fact, it's the opposite, right? And there's research that shows the later there's literally a linear relationship with when you get your first phone and your mental health.
Mm.
Okay, so under, it's just like light. Get dial in your relationship, with light. dial in your relationship with technology. And I think it goes back to this principle of you need to feel like you have control of your life. And going in on your phone does not make you feel like you have control of your life. And I think that is actually the mechanism through which we see such a negative impact on mental health is via this kind of psychological need of control. I think.
Another thing you were talking about there that I've also heard you previously speak on is just how crucial consistency is in when you go to sleep, when you go to
Mm,
bed, and when you wake
yeah.
up. Can you speak to that and some of the science behind why that's so important, even sometimes more
Mm.
important than how long you sleep if it's not consistent?
Yeah, and I kind of referenced this a little bit ago, but yeah, just to I think double click on it. So aligning our circadian rhythms is really important. Circadian rhythms are just natural behaviors that kind of happen in a 24-hour cycle, and they are very much dictated by the natural light dark cycle. So when we are viewing light at a phase of the natural light dark cycle, so after the sun goes down, we're viewing light that puts huge amounts of stress on our body because our body is not expecting that. All right. When we are not viewing light when we should be viewing light during the day, for example, that also puts a lot of stress on our body because our body's expecting to see light, right? So sleep wake time falls into that category of wanting to provide your body with as regular a schedule as possible, right? There are these natural pressures for sleep that and I talked about what happens physiologically when we bypass that initial natural pressure for sleep. Um, we release all these kind of activating hormones, right? And again, when our body isn't expecting that, it puts stress on the body. And that stress over time, when it becomes chronic, so if we keep bypassing that natural pressure for sleep around, for some people it's going to be 10 o'clock, for some people it's be 10:30. But it's usually that's the sweet spot for most humans is of all ages is around, it's kind of between 9:30 and 10:30 p.m. When we constantly bypass that pressure and we flood our system with these activating hormones, it puts stress on our system that results in the form of that can manifest in the form of various types of diseases, mental health issues, inflammation, weight gain. We feel hungrier next day when we bypass our natural pressure for sleep. So you want to try to make your sleep time as consistent as possible. The path to that is definitely waking up at the same time. That will help you fall asleep at the same time every day. So when you wake up in the morning, ideally you're in a situation where, you've spent about 8 to 9 hours in bed. If you're your age, my age, I spend about 7.5 hours in bed and that's all I need. I wake up, 6:10 every single day on my own, 6:10 a.m. I get outside immediately. I view natural light for, 10, 20 minutes. I go outside with my dog and my coffee and I just kind of hang out for a little bit, get that natural light. And then I know I've set my circadian rhythms for the day. My body knows what to do. It got what it expected, and it creates this nice internal synchrony that really does contribute to just mental, physical, and emotional well-being.
I think it's something interesting about sleep that really hammers it in is the science around daylight savings time, which is coming up this weekend.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that day and what it does?
Yeah, I mean, it's there's the most cardiovascular events, stroke and heart attack, during daylight savings, and it's basically when you spring forward, you're losing about I think people lose on average about 44 minutes of sleep. So during daylight savings and this, just this small shift, if your system's already vulnerable, okay? So for people who, you know, are have cardiovascular issues, high blood pressure, whatever it might be, they are more vulnerable during in those small shifts. And I think this just kind of illustrates that, and we see this in the research that we're doing at Whoop that there isn't actually that much oh, just even 44 minutes can create enough disruption, enough stress on the system to kind of put you over the edge, right? And when we look at your age group, that variability of sleep wake time For the high so we took basically 18 to 23-year-olds, and these are Division 1 collegiate athletes, so very robust, resilient humans, great athletes. The tolerable level of variability for that group is about 60 minutes. Now that's just the mean. So some people are gonna be 40 minutes, some people are gonna be a little bit more than 60 minutes, but it's on average is 60 minutes. So as you age, that tolerable level of variability is gonna shrink because you become less robust and resilient as you age, right? That's just a feature of aging. But dialing in your sleep wake time, especially if you could do it when you're younger, you will slow your pace of aging in such a profound way. And not to mention, you'll perform at higher levels. So sleep wake time again is correlated with higher GPA. It's correlated with better performance across every single performance metric in sports you can imagine. It's correlated to psychological functioning. It's correlated to suicidal self, injury that we just talked about, non-suicidal self injury that we just referenced that study. So sleep wake time is absolutely the mother of all performance behaviors. There's no question.
Diving into, the science of sleep and whatnot, I
Mhm.
think a lot of people see many of the catastrophic effects happen later on in life. And I think
Yes,
something that could do for an individual is think, I'm fine now. I'll get
I
my
know.
5 hours of sleep and party while I can. Then
Yeah,
when it starts to hit me, I'll start paying attention. That is
yeah.
not the mindset you want to have. So, could you speak to a younger listener right now the
Mm.
importance of taking full control over your health now so that you don't have to down the road when catastrophes come up?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you just
Catastrophes, man, got
yeah,
that word
yeah.
wrong.
No, no, you're doing amazing. And you said it perfectly. I mean, that's the consequence of, not getting control of your sleep today. And again, a couple times a month, not a big deal, right? But we're talking about chronic short sleep, chronic dysregulated sleep wake time is going to impact your metabolism. It's going to impact your cardiovascular system. It's going to impact, the functioning of every cell, tissue, and organ in your body. Right. So, I talk to a lot of Major League Baseball players in particular who are at the back end of their career who kind of onto the Whoop platform. And there is not one of those guys who said they wish they partied more and slept less when they were younger. And of course, it's their impacts are in the tune of millions of dollars, right? But they say all the time, they're like, I would have if I had just been smarter when I was younger, I'd have 3 more years in the MLB, or I would have had, a couple more seasons in the NHL or, it goes on and on. So I think it's just like there's such an amazing opportunity, like when you're young, to develop habits that are going to set you up to be in control of your health. Like that, like to me, like having control of the trajectory of your health is like the biggest power move, right? And just like, and it's, and I've been really fortunate. Like I was never pressure, like I never felt like social pressure. Like I was kind of like totally oblivious to that. I don't know why. I just like even today, I like don't care. So I think part of like the reasons why people don't take control of their health is because they feel that pressure. But I think if you kind of go back to the very start of this conversation about who do I want to be in the world, what do I value, what do I believe in, you know, curate my circle of friends, curate, where I apply my attention and my thoughts, like if you can do those things, like you can have that's like the keys to the kingdom. Like you will put yourself in like 0.00000% of the population of people who actually can control those four things or actually have a point of view about those four things and are like actively proactively like cultivating it. I just feel like that to me is the biggest power move. And it definitely starts with making decisions around sleep, which I know can feel like maybe a sacrifice in the moment, but very few good things happen between the hours of 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. I mean, I'm here to be proven wrong, but and I know like a lot of creatives like get really creative during that time, and, so I understand that there's those like, that cohort of folks, but to be clear, you're making a choice that is impacting your health, right? There's no reason why you can't be creative during the day, and in fact, that's actually when we should be more creative, but it's because we've made choices to, not sleep during the biological night that now all of a sudden we have to sleep during the day. So we've created this cycle. But that cycle, to be clear, is going to come with some pretty negative consequences health-wise down the road.
And you're living proof of that. I think I heard something that you haven't been sick in like the last 4 years, which
It's
obviously other
I
habits
know.
contribute to it, but,
Yeah, yeah.
um
There's lots of that. Yeah, it's actually 7, and
7,
it,
wow.
it it's so funny. People were like, "No way!"
Jeez.
But like, I could say this on this pod. Like, my family would be like, "Mom, you're lying." Like, of course, I would never lie about that. But it is the fact is truth. I have not been sick for 7 years, and yeah, I mean, a lot of it is, I exercise and recover. Like, I do all those things like in appropriate ways, and I'm a psycho-physiologist, so I kind of understand all these behaviors that contribute. It's been my life's work. So I think it is only proof that what I'm saying is I potentially
You practice what
have
you preach.
some sort of, yeah, authority here. But yeah.
There's a quote that I think my mentor, I came across it last year. I think he shared it with me. The quote was, I think it may be like an old Chinese proverb or something, but the quote is, "A healthy man wants 1,000 things, and a sick man just wants one thing, and that's his health back." What are your
uh,
thoughts on that quote?
I love that. It's so simple. um, and I think so true. I mean, you don't really. I mean, you talk to anyone who's survived cancer, you talk to anyone who is, battling, diabetes, like they do anything to go back to a healthy state. Just where they can wake up and not feel nauseous from chemotherapy, or, I mean, you just think of how difficult it is to, to manage disease states, and how draining it is on, and the burden it puts on your family. Like, that maybe is the other angle. Like, I think about too, like, I need to wake up with like energy so I can take care of my kids, so I can be available and engaged in my life with my colleagues and the partners that I work with, and and most importantly, my children. Like, if you're waking up, a worse version of yourself every day, like, that doesn't just impact you, right? And, sleep deprivation is not just going to impact me. It's going to impact the psychological safety of everyone around me. This is actually a finding from one of the studies that is in. We're writing it up now. It'll go to peer review soon, but we were actually able to link the psychological safety of direct reports to their boss, based on how much sleep the boss got. So you kind of transfer that to a family unit, and if I wake up with sleep debt, my kids are going to feel less psychologically safe. Psychological safety is such a core feature to human, health and performance, and it's basically, how free do I feel to show up as my most authentic version, and that's psychological safety. And you want to try to create those environments because they've been shown to, that's where people, really, humans really flourish and thrive, is in these psychologically safe environments. And there's a direct link between psychological safety and amount of sleep debt people have. So anyway, I think just understanding that, and to go back to this proverb, like, when you think about your health, like, if you are unhealthy or not well, it's not just going to impact you. And I truly believe that if, health education in middle school, elementary school, middle school, high school were more robust, we could cure a lot of society's ills, right? Because I think one of the big problems in society, or when society starts to fall down, is when people are sick and unhealthy. So controlling the trajectory of your health, to me, is a civic duty. And that's kind of, I know that's a really probably hard take, but I fundamentally believe that with every fiber of my being, that it is one of our core responsibilities on this planet, is to be healthy, to not spread disease. you know, and I take that, as you can imagine, very seriously.
One final serious question for you, Kristen.
Mhm.
I think for someone listening, I mean, statistically, with the amount of people who listen to the podcast, there are probably a good amount of people listening right now who their whole perspective on sleep has changed, which I'm thrilled about. With that being said, I think a lot of people can beat themselves up on their current results. And I think I came across this quote
Mm,
and it really emphasized how your trajectory is more important than your current results. He uses the example of finances. You can after speak to it on a sleep side, but author James Clear, he said, it doesn't
mm,
matter how successful or unsuccessful you are right now. What matters is whether your habits are putting you on the path toward success. You should be far more concerned with your current trajectory than with your current results. If you're a millionaire, but you spend more than you earn each month, then you're on a bad trajectory. If your spending habits don't change, it's not going to end well. Conversely, if you're broke, but you save more than you spend every month, then you're on the path toward financial freedom, even if you're
mm,
moving slower than you'd like.
mm. I love that. Yeah, and I think it's important. It's in a lot of my work is centered around like what is this order of operation? Like where do we actually need to apply our effort first if we want to create a foundation that allows us to layer on other things that will help us be our best most productive version of ourselves, whatever it is that we aspire to be in the world. What does this foundation actually look like? And in fact, there is this, a lot of the things that we've talking about are kind of non-negotiables. And that doesn't mean you need to get stressed over them, but it's like, all right, let's figure this out. Let's figure out, let me look at the month. Let me do some planning and figure out, how many nights can I go to bed and wake up at the same time? And then backing up and saying, okay, what kind of boundaries do I need to create with my family members to make this true? Right? What kind of conversations do I might need to have with my girlfriend or my boyfriend or, who's calling me at like midnight, but I'm actually trying to sleep. Like, you kind of have to really, again, I think if you go back and I love that kind of framework by James Clear, and it's really about, but in order to make all of these like habits stick, you have to first figure out, okay, who do I want to be? What do I value? Like that is the place to start. Like get your identity straight. Like if I want to be a person who can wake up and be present and engaged for my family, what needs to be true about my habits, right? And that's kind of how you get to a place where you and how I think about it is, it's identity and values first. You define that, and then the second are the anchors, and this is the habits that James is kind of talking about. And I use anchors as a way to think about it as a starting point because it's like if I have these values that I'm trying to live every single day, what needs to be true about what are the anchor behaviors that I need to engage in daily in order to for this to be true. In order for me to practice who I want to be in the world, what are the behaviors that I need to be engaging in? And when we are constantly practicing who we want to be in the world, and that's in alignment with who we say we want to be in the world, all of a sudden you don't have to look for evidence or proof of who you are. And all the anxiety that falls away from looking for evidence or proof of who you are falls away. Like that's what's so powerful about taking the time to figure out who does it you want to be and what the behaviors are that are going to ladder up to that.
Kristen, one final question for you on a serious note. For those who have listened to our conversation today and are like, this is the starting point to their journey of sleeping and living better,
Mhm.
what would be some resources you would direct them towards, whether it's Whoop's podcast or a blog or a book? Where do you think
Mm,
people should go to learn more about, how they can sleep and live better?
mm. Which I am writing a book right now,
Oh,
that
let's
I'm
go.
really I'm really excited about. Yeah, it's basically just my whole life of just like what are these like psychological and physiological variables that ladder up to, yeah, a more meaningful life. But um, I would say the place to go for sleep, I mean, I think why we sleep is an awesome place to start. If people are like, "Okay, I wanna get this sleep thing under control," I think Matthew Walker's book, and I think he recently put out a new edition. It's so consumable, accessible, easy. It will scare you a little bit, but that might provide some motivation that you need. And then I would say Melissa Urban wrote, it's called The Book of Boundaries, and I I love it. I think it's because a lot of being able to enact behavior change and to kinda create a point of view about your own life means you have to understand how to work with the people who are in your life, right? And that means you need to be constantly kind of setting these little boundaries so you can live in a way that is aligned with who you say you want to be, right? And that requires like having some emotional intelligence to be able to navigate these conversations so you have the space to be that person and practice being that person. So I would say if people are really interested in getting to know understand sleep, I would go there. And then I think if you want to really try to take control of your own life and control of the trajectory of your own life, I think this book of boundaries is a really good read. And it's funny that that just came to my mind randomly. I think it's the first time I've recommended it, but it's really really good, and I think it's good for this age group too that your listeners are
Kristen,
part of. Yeah.
the final question I ask every single guest
Yep.
on every single podcast, way different note than we've been discussing today, but it's what I do, so I'll ask it to you anyways. If you had Gordon Ramsay coming over to your house for dinner, what would you personally choose to make for him?
I have to cook for him.
You do, yeah.
Oh shit. All right, he's the Hell's Kitchen guy.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, oh,
If he slept more, I'd be curious if he'd be nicer to people. That'd be an
I
interesting
know
side.
he's just really irritable and grouchy. Okay, well, I'm such a like pretty boring eater. I would say my most exciting dish. I feel like my Brussels sprouts, and I actually recently ate at one of his restaurants. I think my Brussels sprouts are better than his. So
Oh, okay.
I would
Shots
go
fired.
I'd go all in on the Brussels sprouts, and show him how they're supposed to taste. I maybe just get a bad batch that day. I would make some homemade sourdough bread, um, and probably a steak, like a really, really nice cut of steak, and maybe some homemade sweet potato fries.
Oof. Sounds good to me. Kristen, really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation. And I truly mean this. Thank you for all the ways in which you can contribute to making society a better place because your work has personally helped me. And I know thousands
Mm.
of others. So keep up the great work and know my full support in the years to come.
Well, I appreciate that so much, and thank you for all your good work. What you're doing is just absolutely sensational.